How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Vav, Daf 6 of Masechta Chulin. Friends, Daf Vav is Mamish Gevalt. It is. What do you want me to tell you? Two sections on today's Daf, two kind of main sections on today's Daf. Number one, forbidding the shechitah of kutim and other things. But forbidding the shechitah of kutim. We're going to learn about that. A lot of interesting stuff. And then we will discuss mixtures of demai. Ooh, mixtures of demai. Wow. Friends, let's jump in and enjoy Daf Vav of Masechta Chulin. Friends, we begin on Daf Hey Amid Beis. Just slightly more than halfway through Daf Hey Amid Beis, there's a parenthesis, it says Siman Niklaf, right under that. Omar B'chonin, Omar Reb Yankiv Bar Idi, Reb Shua ben Levi, Mishum Bar Kapora. Okay. Reb Chonin says Niv, Reb Yaakov Idi says Niv, Reb Shua ben Levi says Niv Bar Kapora. Reb Gamliel Uveis Dino. Reb Gamliel and his Bezdin. The Machlokes in Rashi and Tosfos. Which Reb Gamliel is this? Rashi says this is Rabbi Gamliel beno shel Rabbi Yehuda Anasi. Rabbi Yehuda's Anasi's son, Rabbi Gamliel. Tosfos disagrees and says it's the regular Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel de Yavne, Rabbi Yehuda Anasi's grandfather. Okay. Nimnu, Rabbi Gamliel ubezdino, Rabbi Gamliel and his bezdin, Nimnu al shechitah, as kusi ve'asrua. Okay. We have spent some time over the last few days discussing the shechitah of a kusi. We saw, for example, a machlokes between Rava and Abaye. If the shechitah of kutim needs literal supervision, somebody, a yid supervising the shechitah, or maybe yotzei v'nichnas could be sufficient, but it needs some level of supervision. We saw other shitas about kutim that we can only trust them when it comes to deoraisas. Rabbi Eliyahu said we can't trust them ever. We have seen all sorts of different shitas about kutim. The one that we have seen the most often was the shita of that Rave and Abai were arguing about, which is essentially the shita of Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. Taka, interesting. That's actually interesting because Reb Shimon ben Gamliel Mistama would have been the son of Rabbi Gamliel, but he wasn't specifically talking about shechitah anyways. We had the shechitah of Rabbi Gamliel that any mitzvah that they did, we can mamish trust them, and based on that we were assuming that we can trust the shechitah of kutim. Abaye had said, but you'd have to have a yid supervising them. Rava said that even Yosef Nichnas is enough. Comes Rabbi Gamliel, whichever Rabbi Gamliel, whether it's Rabbi Gamliel beno shel Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, whether it is Rabbi Gamliel de Yavne, comes Rabbi Gamliel in his bezdin and he says, forget about it. Shechitah of kutim is off limits. 100% osir. Omar le Reb Zer le Reb Yaakov Ba'idi. So Reb Zer says to Reb Yaakov Ba'idi, who is on that chain of quoters, right? So Omar Reb Chanan, Omar Reb Yaakov Ba'idi, Omar Reb Shua ben Levi, Mishum Bar Kapara. So Reb Yaakov Ba'idi. So Reb Zer says to Reb Yaakov Ba'idi, Shema lo Shama Rebbe Elo b'she'ein Yisrael Omid al Gabav. Maybe Rabbi Yaakov Ba'idi is it possible that maybe this halacha that Rabbi Gamliel and his bezdin said that the shechitah of kutim is also, maybe that's only if there's no yid observing. Maybe that's what it means. That if you go to the supermarket and there's a piece of meat there and it was shechted by a kuti, it's also. Meaning if there was no yid who observed the shechitah. But if there's a yid who observed the shechitah, or as we've been talking about, even if you take a kazayas and feed it to the kuti and he eats it, right? We said it could be okay. Maybe what it's saying is that if you go to the supermarket and the shaykhid is not there to feed him a kazayas of it, and it was shechted by a kusi, maybe in that case you can't eat it if there was nobody was supervising the kuti. But maybe if there was so that's where Rabbi Gamliel says that it's osir. When there was no supervision, it's osir. But maybe if there was supervision, it's mutter. So Omar le Domi Haimir Abonon Kidilo Gmiri Inche Shmaita. Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi responds fierily that It sounds, Reb Zera, you're sounding like you've never learned anything before. If that's the case, do I really need Rabbi Gamliel and his Bezdin to make a whole gezerah that a kuti cannot be trusted without any sort of hashgacha? That goes without saying. If we're talking about a situation like we've been talking about until now, that you have to have a yid who's watching, observing the shechitah, otherwise you can't eat it. We don't need Rabbi Gamliel to make that gezerah. No, the chiddush of Rabbi Gamliel and his Bezdin is that you can't eat it ever. That's the chiddush. That's what they had needed to come to implement here. So it says Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, no. Rabbi Gamliel's gezerah is final. No eating the shechitah of kutim, kibla minei or lo kibla minei. And now the shaila is, did Rabbi Zera accept that? Did Rabbi Zera accept that personally? After he heard about this gezerah, that the shechitah of kutim is completely, always, entirely off limits, did Rabbi Zera accept that? Or did he not accept it? Tashma, come in here. The Omer Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Omer Basi, says, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak in the name of Asi, there's a note that changed Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak to Rav Nachman Cohen. I don't know who that is, but it doesn't really make sense to say that it's Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, because Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak was in Babble, and Rav Asi was in Eretz Yisrael, and talking about Rav Yochanan. So it's a little weird, but I'm just going to leave the text as is. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Omer Asi, says Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, name of Asi, Ani Ra'isi es Rav Yochanan she'ochal mishchitas kusi. Says Rav Asi that I observed Rabbi Yochanan eating the shechitah of a kusi. I observed Rabbi Yochanan, he ate the shechitah of a kusi. Ve'af Rab Asi ochal mishchitas kusi, and Rab Asi himself also ate from the shechitah of a kusi. V'toiba Rab Zera, and Rab Zera was wondering, because Rab Zera, right? So Rab Zera hears that, or either hears or observed, but Rab Zera, though, upon either hearing or witnessing that Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Asi ate the shechitah of a kuti, and he was saying, wait a second, but what about Rabbi Gamliel's gezerah? And he was wondering, how come Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Asi were eating the shechitah of a kuti after the gezerah of Rabbi Gamliel? Is it possible, lo shmielu? Is it possible that they simply were unaware of Rabbi Gamliel's gezerah not to eat the shechitah of a kuti? The ishmielu avu mikablele, and if they would have been aware of the gezerah, so then they would not have eaten the shechitah of a kuti. O dilma shmielu, or maybe no, they were aware of the gezerah of velo kiblua, but they did not accept this gezerah, and therefore they ate the shechitah of a kuti nonetheless. That was what Reb Zera was wondering. He was wondering, why did Rabbi Yochanan or Rabbi Asi eat the shechitah of a kuti? Is it because they were unaware of the gezerah not to eat it? Or are they aware of it and they chose, and they disagree with it? Hadar Pashit Linafshe. Reb Zera then scratched his own itch. He then answered his wonderment with the following conclusion: Mistavra deshmielu velo kiblua. It must be, and listen to the reason why. It's fascinating. It must be that they are aware of the gezerah and they chose, they decided not to accept it. The isalka daitich lo shmiya lehu, because if it enters your mind that they were unaware of the gezerah and that and if they would have known about the gezerah, they would have agreed with it and they would have accepted it. If it is possible that essentially they were eating something forbidden, something that they didn't realize was forbidden, and that's why they ate it by mistake. If they would have known that Rabbi Gamliel had said that it's osur, they would have certainly not eaten it because it's osur. Says Reb Zera, that cannot be. How could it possibly be that it would have worked out for these tzaddikim to be eating meat of a kusi if that meat of a kusi is from the shalosh klipos atmeos? How could it be? Tomorrow we're going to learn about the donkey of a Pinchas ben Yair. The donkey of a Pinchas ben Yair would not eat animal food that was untied. If it was untied, he wouldn't touch it. Only once it was tied would he eat it. If the animals of the tzaddikim have a chush, know not to eat untied food, and the Rabbanei Shalom would not cause them to eat untied food, alachas kamo v'chamo, tzaddikim themselves would not be unwittingly eating osur food. What is right? Rashi says something. Rashi says, "Heyach yigrom shum so'in." How could the so'in cause lifnei tzaddikim ayidei shogeg shum dvar avon? How could the so'in cause that the tzaddikim should even unwittingly, eat something that they shouldn't be eating? And therefore, Reb Zer concludes the fact that Reb Yochanan and Reb Asi ate this meat means that they were aware. It means that they made a conscious decision that this meat is kosher. I imagine it's because there was somebody observing the shechitah, but they were aware of the gezerah and they chose to eat the meat anyways. Because if they were unaware of it, it could. Reb Zer says, I cannot fathom that they would have ended up eating something essentially that if they only would have known, they would have held it was asur. I can't be makabel that they would have eaten something that was essentially asur. No, it must be that they were eating something that they felt was mutter. Tzaddikim atzman lo kol shekain, certainly these tzaddikim would not eat something that would be asur even by accident. V'sal gadaitech lo kibla mine. And now to answer the question, did Reb Zera accept that according to Rabbi Gamliel, did Reb Zera accept that the meat of kusim is asur or not? If it enters your mind that Reb Zera did not accept that the meat of kusim is asur, if Reb Zera continued to hold that as long as you have somebody, a yid, observing the kusi, the meat is kosher, well then what's he surprised about when it comes to Rabbi Yochanan and Reb Asi? He also eats meat of a kusi. The fact that Reb Zera was stopped in his tracks when he was aware that Reb Yochanan and Reb Asi were eating the meat of kutim. He says, how could this be? What's the deal over here? Clearly, it's a big deal for Reb Zera. If Reb Zera felt that, yeah, of course, the meat of a kuti is kosher as long as you have a yid who's observing, well, then what's there to be so worked up about with Reb Yochanan and Reb Asi? They were eating meat that was slaughtered by a kusi when a yid was observing. What's the big deal? The fact that it's a big deal means that Memela, he accepted what Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi said, that the Gezer of Rabbi Gamliel and his Bezdin meant that meat of a kusi can never, ever be eaten, and that's why he was trying to figure out, well then why was Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Asi eating it? Is it because they were unaware, or is it because they simply don't agree? Again, if it enters your mind that Reb Zera did not accept this gezerah, and he continued to hold that the meat of a shechitah of a kusi could be kosher if there was a yid observing them to confirm that it's kosher, the shechitah. So lishane le kan kishisol oimer al gabav, kan kisheni sol oimer al gabav. No big deal. How could it be that Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Asi were eating the meat of a kusi? Because clearly there was a yid observing the shechitah, and if not, then it would be also. But they were eating it, so clearly there was somebody observing it. Elalav, the fact that Reb Zera stopped in his tracks, shmamina kiblamine shmamina. Clearly, Reb Zera accepted the gezerah of Rabbi Gamliel and his bezdin that meat of a kuti is completely asur, and that is why he was trying to figure out how to make this, how to resolve this with the fact that Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Asi ate the meat. And ultimately, he resolved that they chose to eat the meat because otherwise how could it be that they would have eaten it by accident? You can drink a shluck of tea and we'll go weiter. Now, frag the Gemara, my timer goes Rabbanon. How come Rabbi Gamliel had to make such a gezerah? How come Rabbi Gamliel had to make a gezerah that all meat of kutim is off limits all the time? Because just like one time Reb Meir sent Reb Shimon Reb Elazar to get some wine from the kusis, Sava, a certain elder found Reb Shimon ben Elazar when he was on the way. There's a very famous Tosfos on this daf. The famous Tosfos. Often when Hahu Sava comes up in the Gemara, I point out that there's a shechitah that this is the opinion of that Hahu Sava is Eliyahu Hanavi. That's based on a Tosfos. The first Tosfos in the Babble Aleph says, Yesh meforshim dechol makom shu mazkir Hahu Sava hu Eliyahu. That there are those who say that whenever the Gemara talks about Hahu Sava, a certain elder, it's Eliyahu Hanavi. Tosfos then proceeds to point out, Tosfos then points out that, however, at the very least, by the story of Lag BaOmer, the story with Reb Shimon ben Yochai, when he sees a certain elder, which I believe he then, I think, made him into a pile of bones or something, so it couldn't have been Eliyahu Hanavi. So certainly in that story, I didn't look it up again, but I think that was the case. He basically killed him, so he didn't kill Eliyahu Hanavi. Hahu Sava is not Eliyahu Hanavi there. So it sounds like basically Tosfos says that there are those who say that whenever Hahu Sava comes up in the Gemara, it's Eliyahu Hanavi. He immediately then qualifies that we're saying, apparently, it's not going to be in all cases. It doesn't assume it's always Eliyahu Hanavi. But in this case, this is, I think, there's an argument to be, that there's an argument to be made that Hahu Sava could be Eliyahu Hanavi in this case. After all, Reb Shimon ben Elazar is going on his way to procure wine of a kusi and comes out of nowhere, Hahu Sava, and he says, wait a minute. Ashkeche Hahu Sava, a certain elder, finds Reb Shimon ben Elazar, Amrle, and he says, V'samto sakin b'loy echa. In Baal Nefesh Ato, he quotes a pasuk from Mishlei that says, and you will place a knife in your gullet. I don't know, the JPS says gullet, which means your esophagus, but there's alternatively, it could mean, Rashi says it means, I think, your jaw. Basically, he's saying, stop right there in Baal Nefesh Ato if you are a good guy. What does Rashi say? Baal Nefesh Ato, Adam kosher Ato, if you're a kosher person. Halach Reb Shimon ben Elazar, B'siba Dvarim Lefnei Reb Meir. Reb Shimon ben Elazar went back to Reb Meir. He says, look what happened. A certain elder approached me and he says, I wouldn't continue if I were you. V'gazer alein. And Reb Meir at that point made a gezerah that no eating, no drinking, no consuming the wine of kusis. The wine of kusis is off limits. My time, how come Amr of Nachman by Yitzchak says of Nachman by Yitzchak, Demus Yoina Matzu Loin B'Reish Agrizim, that they found the likeness of a dove, an Avodah Zarah dove, by Har Grizim, Shoy Ovdin Osa, and they would worship that dove on Har Grizim. They would worship that dove on Har Grizim. They were essentially doing Avodah Zarah. Tosfos Taka says something interesting, which is that he says, "B'medrash yesh he avodas kochavim shehitmin Yaakov tachas Elah b'Har Shechem." That the Chumash says that after Yaakov and his children destroyed Shechem, so it says Yaakov tells them, "Hey, everybody, get rid of your Avodah Zarah that you may have taken from Shechem," and he buried it under a tree over there. And says Tosfos that these birds may have been taka dat avodah zarah, which is interesting. The Ramban al Torah, though, he says that wasn't actually avodah zarah, because you can't just bury avodah zarah; you have to destroy avodah zarah. Yaakov just buried it. But anyways, interesting discussion about that. Okay, but they were doing avodah zarah, so because the kusim were doing avodah zarah, and even though it was just some of the kusim, it was only the kusim that lived near Har Grizim were serving this avodah zarah, but nonetheless, for Meir l'taimid dechayish l'miuta v'gaza ruba atu miuta. Rav Meir's shita is choshish in l'miuta, and therefore, even though it's only some of the kusim that were serving this avodah zarah, he then says, no, you can't drink any of the wine of kusim out of concern for avodah zarah. Rabbi Gamliel ubeis dino, and based on that, it was for the same reason that Rabbi Gamliel and his bezdin. So interestingly, it depends. If you hold like Tosfos is that this is Rabbi Gamliel Diyavne, who was Rabbi Yehuda Anasi's grandfather, who would have been before Reb Meir. So it would mean that so he's not doing it based on Reb Meir, because Reb Meir was later. So it would be for the same reason. Reb Meir also says that the shechitah of kutim is asur. But if you say that it's Reb Yehuda Anasi's son, Rabbi Gamliel, so then you could say that then Rabbi Gamliel's son, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's son, Rabbi Gamliel, based on the prior gezerah of Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Gamliel, Binosh Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, then applied this to shechitah as well. Though Tosfos taka asks on Daf Yomi Chullin that it wouldn't necessarily make sense. This is taka one of Tosfos' arguments to say that it taka is Rabbi Gamliel diyavne, because shechitah is the oraisa, yenesach is the rabbanon. So therefore, avodah zarah is the oraisa, but stam yenum is the rabbanon, whereas shechita is the oraisa, and therefore, it wouldn't have made sense, argues Tosfos, that Reb Meir would have made a gezerah only for the wine, but not for the shechita, and that shechita only came later on. Anyways, he felt that shechita would have been more serious than the wine. Anyways, so where were we? So Rabbi Gamliel's gezerah by shechita, by kutim, is based on the same concept, the fact that they are of the avodah zarah. Nami kramer svirlu, that we also should not, it says Rabbi Gamliel made a gezerah that we also should not be trusting the shechita of kusim. Frag the Gemara, pashta dekra b'mai ksiv. What's pshat with that pasuk in Mishlei? So if we look at the pasukim in Mishlei, right, we just quoted, right, so Eliyahu, right, the Hahu Sava had quoted a pasuk to Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. He had said, "V'samta sakin biloecha," put a knife in your gullet, in bal nefesh ata. If you are how do you define bal nefesh? Im adam kosher ata. If you're an adam kosher. So the pasukim, this is the first two pasukim in the 23rd chapter of Mishlei. What's Mishlei in English? Mishlei is, I don't remember. What's Mishlei in English? I don't think it's parables. I don't remember. Anyways, Proverbs. So it says there, Kiseshev lilchom es Moshe, when you go to dine with a ruler, bin tovin es asher lefanecha, understand what is before you. V'samta sakin bilaecha, place a knife in your gullet, in bal nefesh ata, if you are a good guy. So says the Gemara, pashte dekra b'mai ksiv. How do we understand these two verses? B'talmud hayoshev lifnei rabo. It's talking about a student who is sitting before his teacher. The Reb Chia taught, Kiseshev lilchom es Moshel. When you go to dine with a ruler, bin tovin es asher lefanecha, understand what's before you. V'samta sakin biloecha im bal nefesh ato im yodeya talmud berabo. If a student knows about his teacher, sheyodeya lachzir lotam, that the question that the student has, the teacher will be able to provide an answer for his question. Bin, so understand, ask the question so that you can get an answer from your teacher. Ve'im lav, but if the student feels that the teacher would be unable to answer his question, tovin eis asher lefanecha v'samta sakin biloecha. Understand what is before you. Understand that your teacher would be unable to answer you, and by asking your teacher, you can embarrass your teacher and simply put a knife in your jugular. Stop. Hold yourself, in your, I don't know. Don't do it. Don't ask. In Bal Nefesh Ata, and now if you need to, Prosh Emenu, go and find a new, if you need to get an answer to that question, and this Rebbe can't provide it, so don't ask, find another Rebbe. Rabbi Yitzchak ben Yosef Shadri Rababo Lasuri Chamer Bekusai. Rababo had sent Rabbi Yitzchak ben Yosef to procure wine from the Kusis. Ashkechayahu Sava, a certain elder, Eliyahu Hanavi, intercepted Rabbi Yitzchak ben Yosef. Amalei says to Rabbi Yitzchak ben Yosef, Leis kan shemrei Torah. These people, these Kusis, they are not shemrei Torah. Halach Rabbi Yitzchak v'sipa dvarim l'fnei Rabbo. So Rabbi Yitzchak went to Rabbi Abbo and he says, look, this is what happened. I was on my way and a certain elder came. He says, they're not shemrei Torah. Halach Rabbi Abbo v'sipa dvarim l'fnei Rabbi Ami v'Rabbi Asi. So Rabbi Abbo went and he reported this incident to Rabbi Ami v'Rabbi Asi. And Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi declared that the kusim are 100% of the kochavim gemurim, complete of the kochavim. Demai, what's the nafkamina? No, so it's okay. So Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi said they're complete of the kochavim. No, what does that mean? If it's to mean that we can't eat their shechitah and that we have to be concerned about yei nesech. Me'asam gazubu rabbanon, but they already had a gezerah. Rabbi Gamliel had already made a gezerah about the shechitah. Rabbi Meir had already made a gezerah about the wine. So what was Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi making a gezerah about when they said they are complete of the kochavim? Inu gazav lo kiblu minayu, also Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi gazav kiblu minayu. Well, look, initially when Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Meir had made these gezerahs, they didn't stick. They didn't stick. Rashi says because at the time it was kusis were too much part. Right, the Yidden were too dependent on the kusis. Was gzera she'ena tzibur yichol namod ba. It was just it didn't stick, these gezeras. But Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi, things had already changed. I guess it was already possible to find wine and meat and stuff. You didn't need the kutis. They weren't intertwined with daily life in the same way, and it was easier. And this time, the Gezerah stuck. It worked. Okay, so initially there was a Gezerah, came Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi, they made the Kusims, they declared the Kusim complete of the Kochavim, and now this time it stuck, and the Yidden no longer purchased the wine and the meat of Kusis. My of the Kochavim Gemurin, what does it mean that they're complete of the Kochavim? Amr Nachman by Yitzchak levato rishus veliten rishus. To nullify and to give a rishus. What does that mean? Who can tell me what this means? Friends, we learn Masechta Eruvin. This is talking about a situation where you have Reuven, Shimon, and Levi who live in a chutzner. Reuven, Shimon, and Levi all live in the same chutzner. Now, of course, if you remember from Masechta Eruvin, when you have a chutzner with multiple houses that open up into that chutzner, by default on Shabbos, you cannot carry from your house into the shared space, into the chutzner, into the courtyard, which is a shared space by all three houses. You can't, on Shabbos, you cannot, even though the chutzner is Rishus HaYachid, nonetheless, since there are multiple houses that open up into that chutzner, the halacha is that you cannot carry from your house into the chutzner and vice versa from the chutzner into your house. So what do? You make an eruv. Reuven, Shimon, and Levi together they make a bread. Together they buy a bread. They make a bread. Whatever, they all chip in for a bread. They take the bread. They put it in one of the houses. Let's say Reuven's house. And now it's an Eruv Chatzeris. You take the bread, you put it in Reuven's house. Now it's Ke'ilu, they're Kona Shvisa in Reuven's house. It's like they're all spending Shabbos in Reuven's house, and it makes the whole Chatzar and all the houses Ke'ilu all one property, and they are able to carry now in and out of all of the houses to and from the Chatzar. But in order for the Eruv Chatzeros to work, everyone has to participate. Reuven, Shimon, and Levi have to participate in order for this to work. If Levi didn't participate and he wasn't part of the Eruv Chatzeros, then nobody can carry from their homes into the Chatzer. Now, it's a machlokes between Beishamai and Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel says even on Shabbos, Levi could be mevatel his access to the Chatzer, his rishus to the Chatzer. So, for example, let's say Shabbos, they couldn't find Levi before Shabbos, whatever it was, he was unavailable. So Reuven and Shimon made a Eruv amongst themselves. So they got this bread, they put it in Reuven's house, but the Eruv is currently ineffective because Levi didn't participate in it. So Levi could be mevatel his rishus. He could say, my portion in this chutzner, in this courtyard, I'm being mevatel it. It doesn't belong to me, it belongs to you two. And that being the case, okay, it's no longer, Levi's no longer connected. It's all Reuven and Shimon's. And now Reuven and Shimon, and even Levi, can carry in the chutzner because at least Levi's, let's say Levi just gave his access to the chutzner, so his house is going to be off limits. But in terms of Reuven and Shimon's house, Reuven and Shimon, and even Levi can carry between the chutzner and Reuven and Shimon's house, whatever, because he's mevatel. So long as Levi is not mevatel is rishus, right? His portion of his chelek, his portion of the chutzner, then nobody can carry in the chutzner from the houses into the chutzner, from the chutzner into the houses. But if Levi relinquishes his portion of, let's say, the chutzner, so now, okay, Levi kind of removed himself from the cheshbon, and there's an Eruv between Reuven and Shimon can carry from their houses into the chutzner and vice versa. Givaldi. The thing is, what if the three houses were not occupied by Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, but rather by Reuven, Shimon, and James? James is not Jewish. So what happens now is Reuven and Shimon can't make an Eruv. Because in order for the Eruv to work, everyone needs to participate. James is not Jewish. You can't participate in the Eruv. And we can't ignore James. Where one of the houses belongs to James. Basically, Reuven and Shimon can't make an Eruv. Because James is not Jewish and he can't participate in the Eruv. What do they do? So what can you do? James cannot be mevatel his rishus like Levi was able to. James can't be mevatel his rishus. Reuven or Shimon or both of them, they would have to rent Levi. They would have to rent James's house and his rishus, his access to the rishus. They'd have to rent it from him. Once they rent it from him, then Reuven and Shimon can now make an Eruv. So now what? So when Reb Ami and Reb Asi said that kusim are ovdei kuchot gemurin, it means that they're like James. That if you live in a chutzner with a kusi, the kusi cannot be mevatel his portion in the chutzner. You have to rent his rishus his chelik in the chutzner from him in the same way that you would have to do that from James, from a non-Jew. So, okay, where am I? Okay. So, okay. The nafkamina is in terms of if they can or can't be mevatel their portion in the chatzer to allow the others, the yidden, to make an eruv chatzeres. Uchdetanin, like we learned in a brayse, you saw a mumar misham shabbat b'shuk that if Levi is a mumar, but at least b'farhesia, at least in public, he's shomer Shabbos, mevatel rishos v'notin rishos, he keep mevatel his portion in the Chatzar to Reuven and Shimon. V'she'enu misham shabbat b'shuk, but if he's mechal Shabbos b'farhesia, einu mevatel rishos v'notin rishos, he can't, he's unable to be mevatel his portion in the Chatzar. Because they said Yisrael nosin rishos mevatel rishos, because the halacha is that a yid, Levi, assuming that he's a shomer Torah mitzvahs, can be mevatel his portion in the chotzer. But by a non-Jew, you have to actually rent his property, his rishus in the chotzer, at least from him. Ketzad how so? Omar lo rishusi knui lecha rishusi mevutelis lecha. How is Levi mevatel rishus? Right, when we say that Levi could be mevatel rishus, what does that look like? Either he could say my rishus is kinuya to you, is acquired to you, or my rishus mevutelis lecha. It is batel to you. Kana, that works. And you don't need to make it official with any kind of kinyan chalifin. It's enough that Levi just says, I'm being mevatel my rishus to Reuven and Shimon, and that is sufficient. So when Reb Ami and Reb Asi say that kusim are complete of the kochavim, it means that they cannot be mevatel their chelek in the chotzer. You have to actually rent their portion of the chotzer from them. And now we get to the next section of today's daf, mixtures of demai. Friends, what's demai? What's demai? We know what demai is. It's based on the Gemara in Masechta Sota, at the end of Masechta Sota, that I think was Yochanan Kohen Gadol. He noticed that in Eretz Yisrael there was a phenomenon that some of the Am Haaretzes were not separating meiser from their produce, so he established the concept of demai, that when one purchases produce from an Am Haaretz, so there's a suffix if they separated meiser or not. Truma they separate, because truma, first of all, it's not that much, and also it's midah, it's a chiyuv, it's misa b'dei shamayim. But meiser they wouldn't necessarily separate. It was a shaila. It's because, of course, rov ami arts ma'asrmeim. Of course, there is a shita that says that most ami arts do separate meiser. Anyways, there's a suffix about whether meiser was separated. So if you're purchasing demai, you have to separate your own meiser, right? Truma is kind of any amount. Generally we assume 2% of the crop. Meiser is 10%. It's a lot more. So there's a concern that amei haaretz don't separate meiser. So if you purchase produce from an amei haaretz, you have to separate your own meiser. Now, Reb Zera v'Rav Asi iklu lefundika diyoy. Reb Zera and Reb Asi went to a place called Yoy, and they stayed at the Yoy Kretschmer. Aizu l'kamayu beitzim amitzumakos. They served them roasted eggs by Yoyin that was then had some kind of wine. It somehow was cooked with wine somehow. So they weren't drinking wine straight up, but there was like wine in the dish, some kind of egg dish with wine in it. Now wine is something that you have to separate. Tirosh is wine. Wine, we have to be concerned about demai. And the very sweet owners of the Yai Kretschmer, they were Am Haaretzes, very sweet but Am Haaretzes. And therefore there's a concern about demai. So there was based on Amtsumakis by Yoin. There's some kind of egg dish that had wine in it, wine mixed into it. Reb Zera did not eat the dish. Reb Asi ate it. Reb Zera says to Reb Asi, but what about the fact that there is some wine in the dish? It's a tarovis, it's a mixture in which there is demai, right? It was an egg dish that had wine in it, wine mixed into it. So it was a mixture that had in it demai. The wine is demai. So Amle lava datoy. So Reb Asi says, oops, I ate it because I was unaware. I was unaware that there was demai in it. Reb Zera, but Reb Zera was perplexed. He was perplexed just like he was perplexed when Reb Yochanan and Reb Asi ate meat shechted by a kusi, because he couldn't understand. How could it be that if in fact a mixture of demai is osir, How could it be that Rabbi Asi ate it, even if he was unaware? Is it possible that if a mixture of demai is also and it would have happened that Reb Asi ate something that's osur? Memela, the fact that Reb Asi ate it, it must mean that a mixture of demai is mutter, you're allowed to eat it. After all, if even the animals of tzaddikim, Hashem does not allow a takala to come ayodin, does not allow them, right? It would make it so that they don't eat anything osur. Tzaddikim atzman lo kosher, and certainly the Rabban Shalom would make sure that the tzaddikim themselves, like Rabbi Ami in this case, would not be eating something osur. The fact that Rabbi Ami ate it, memela, means that clearly Tairovas Shel Demai is mutter. Nofak Reb Zera dak ve'ashkach. So Reb Zera then was inspired to look into this topic, to look into this sugya of mixtures of demai. And he found the sign that we learned in a brayse, halekeach yayin loses lesoch amurius, that if a person buys wine, if a chaver, if somebody who is makbid on Trumas HaMaasers buys, a trustworthy person buys wine from an Amma Aretz, now he's buying wine, but that wine is going to be mixed in to some kind of a fish brine, or lesocha aluntis, some kind of elixir, or some kind of mixture that they would use for tincture of sorts. Kashinin lasos me'antrinin, or vetch that was going to be ground up and mixed together with other things. Adashim lasos me'anresisin, or to grind up lentils to mix with other things. So basically, if a person is buying demai, but that demai is going to be mixed in with other things, it's going to be ultimately a mixture of demai. Chayiv mishum demai. So nonetheless, he's chayiv to separate meiser, because since ultimately he's going to mix them with other things, but right now he's buying them be'en. He's buying them straight up. He's buying wine right now. He's buying lentils. He's buying vetch. So he's got to separate meiser from those. And certainly, if he knows for sure that they are untied, well, then it goes without saying that he would have to tie them. Because that's not demai anymore, that's just tevel. V'hein atzman mutar. However, if he would buy the final product, if he would buy the fish brine that has wine in it, demai wine in it, or if he would buy the tincture that has demai wine in it, or something that has the lentils or the veg mixed into it, and it was demai, mutarin, that would be permitted. He would not have to separate any maestris, mipnei shehein ta'aroves, because it's a mixture. So says Reb Zera, aha, I see then that a mixture of demai, something that has demai mixed into it, is permitted, which explains how it was possible for Reb Asi to eat that egg dish that had wine mixed into it that was demai, because a mixture, where he was served the dish that had the wine was already mixed into it when he received it. It was a mixture that has demai mixed into it that is permitted. Frag Gemara, v'lo gazra al ta'aroves demai. Is that really true? That there's no gezerah against a mixture of demai, that a mixture of demai is okay? V'atani, we learn in the brayse, anosin lishchento isa lafos v'gder levashel, that if a person gives to his neighbor who is an Am Haaretz, a dough to bake, or some ingredients, some food to cook for him, and he provides everything. He provides the dough, he provides the leaven, the sourdough starter, he provides the food with all the spices, everything that you need. He just needs somebody to bake it for him, to cook the dish for him. Eino choshesh l'seor v'tavlin sheba. He does not need to be concerned about anything. After all, he's the one providing all of the ingredients. He does not have to be concerned that the neighbor who's going to be cooking or baking is going to swap out any of his ingredients for her ingredients or add her own ingredients. No, he can assume that the ingredients that he provided are the ingredients that were used, and there's no concern. Lo mishum shvius, lo mishum meiser. Doesn't have to be concerned about meiser, that maybe, right, she's an Eishes Ha'aretz, maybe she put in some of her own stuff, and maybe it's demai, he has to separate meiser. No, he provided all of the ingredients. He doesn't have to be concerned that there's anything expected in the product that he's receiving in return. But if he says to her, Asi li mishalichi, but if he says to her, look, here's some dough, but I need you to provide the starter, or here's some ingredients, but I need you to add some spices. Well, now already, choshesh, he needs to be concerned, the seor v'tavlin sheba, for the leaven and the spices, mishum shvius mishum meiser, for shvius and meiser. Tosfos points out that spices are not actually chayav in meiser, and therefore spices is specifically a shvius concern. But anyways, the point is, it's important, but the point is that here we have a situation of a mixture, and we're saying choshesh l'sheor, right? He gives her the dough, he gives her the raw ingredients, and he says, I need you to provide the starter, I need you to provide the spices. And now, so she's going to put in her own stuff, and yeah, sure, she's an Eishes Ha'aretz, but the product that he's receiving in return is a mixture. And yet we're saying that he does need to be concerned about meiser and about shmita. So apparently, even though the product he's receiving is a mixture, there still is a concern for demai. So Shiny Asim, to which the Gemara says, no. By default, look, in principle, there is no concern about a mixture of demai. Like we demonstrated earlier, that if you buy, more fish brine that has wine in it, there's no concern about demai. But Shiny Asim, this case where he gives his neighbor the dough or the ingredients and says, I need you to provide the starter, I need you to provide the spices. Since he's making her his shaliach, he's saying, here's these ingredients, but I need you to please provide these other ingredients. He's making her his shaliach to provide these ingredients. It's like he himself is adding these ingredients, and therefore he has to make sure that they are not demai. Rav from Amr says, Rav from Shiny Seor Vitavlin de Litaima Ovid, Vitaima lo Batil. Rav from says that this case with the neighbor is different than the case with the Morius and the case with the Aluntis. Because the case with the neighbor, she's providing leaven, she's providing spices. These are main parts of the product that's being made, and they're providing significant flavor. They are ikr, and therefore they are not batal, and he has to be concerned about tithing them, about separating meiser. But in the earlier cases, when he's buying Moria, some kind of a fish brine, the wine is not the main flavor over there, and therefore we could say it's a mixture that has demai in it, and the demai part of the mixture of the wine is not a core element of this brine, and therefore we say, well, it's a mixture of demai, it's not a concern. So essentially we're saying that a mixture of demai is okay, you don't have to separate. You don't have to be concerned about separating meiser from a mixture of demai. However, there is a caveat that so long as the demai is not the main ingredient, is not providing major flavor in the dish. If it is, well, then you are going to have to be concerned about separating meiser. We had said that in the ratio a few minutes ago, that when he gives dough to his neighbor with starter, that when he gives the ingredients with all the spices, so we said he doesn't have to be concerned about demai, because there's no concern that she's going to be adding her own stuff. He provided all the ingredients. There's not going to be any surprises in the product that he receives in return. But is that really true? That we don't have to be concerned that the neighbor is going to add any of her own spices, that he's not going to receive back anything that he did not provide initially? We learn in a Mishnah in Masechta Demai, Hanosin Lichamoso, that if a person is giving dough to his mother-in-law to make for him bread, Me'aser es shehu nosein la, he separates meiser before he gives it to her. The es shehu nota mimena, and he also separates meiser from what he receives in return, out of concern for demai, that he separates meiser from what he gives to his mother-in-law, because we're concerned that what he gives may not be what he gets back, and he wants to make sure that his mother-in-law is going to be eating something that's tied. He doesn't want to be giving her something that's untied. And also, he takes meiser from what he gets back out of concern that his mother-in-law is actually giving him a product that he didn't give her, and maybe this needs to therefore be tied. Because there is a concern that his mother-in-law, if she makes this bread and it doesn't come out good, so she's going to make another bread and give back the new bread because the initial bread didn't come out good. So the Gemara says, yeah, okay, but that's a concern that's unique for his mother-in-law. Rabbi says in that Mishnah itself, the reason why by the mother-in-law specifically there is a concern for separating, right? There was a concern that she might switch out the product and add something of it on her own, is because b'takonas bita, she wants to make sure that, if we're talking about bread, she wants her daughter to have a good bread. If the initial bread didn't come out good, so she's gonna swap it out for a new bread that she's making from her own products, to make sure that her daughter has good bread. And she's embarrassed from her son-in-law. She doesn't want, she wants to impress her son-in-law. She doesn't want to be giving back, returning something that's not good. So she wants her daughter to have the best. She wants her son-in-law not to think that she's incompetent. So therefore, to ask the question of, do we have to be concerned that the person, that in the case of the neighbor, we had said that there's no concern that she's going to add any new ingredients and that he's going to be getting back things that he didn't initially provide. And we say that, yeah, that's the case. We can say so. We brought a raya from a Mishnah that by the mother-in-law, we are concerned that we might get something else back. That's unique to the mother-in-law who's looking out for her daughter and son-in-law. But one second, is it really so unique to the mother-in-law? We learned in another Mishnah in Masechta Demai. It was actually the Mishnah before the Mishnah that we just learned. That if somebody is giving ingredients to his host, if he's staying at a kretschmer, and he gives to the owner of the kretschmer some ingredients, can you cook these things for me? He separates the mai from what he gives her. He separates meiser before giving the ingredients to her. And he also separates meiser from what he receives in return. Specifically because we are concerned that she's going to be returning products that he did not give, new products that need to be tied. So we are concerned that the innkeeper is going to switch things. So there does seem to be a concern about things getting swapped. One second, I'm going to take a little tea. So answers the Gemara, Hasam Nami, there's a reason why she might be switching the product that she's returning. Moria v'amr, she says, Bar Beirav lecho chamima v'ana eichel kriya. She says, look, here is this student or so, whoever is staying there, here's the student who's staying at my house, let me give him the hot bread and I'll take the cold bread, right? The concern is, she's the innkeeper, she wants to provide hospitality for this person who's staying there. She was provided, right, the guest, this student, I guess, gave her ingredients to make into bread or whatever. She made the bread, it was warm, but now it's gotten cold. She says, you know what, I'm going to make a new bread. Let me give him the warm one, and I'll take the original one, and she'll be giving him back one. She'll basically be giving him back a product that he didn't provide the ingredients for. So there's a concern there that maybe she's going to say, you know what, I'm going to make a fresh one for my own so that he has a warm bread rather than a cold bread. Perfecting Gemara, but still, again, are we in fact not concerned about a switcheroo? We learn in the Brisa, Eishes Chaver, the wife of a Chaver, somebody who's trustworthy by Trumas and Maestris, Tochenes im Eishes Amaretz, can grind wheat together with an Eishes Amaretz, Bizman Shehi Timeya. If the Eishes Chaver is Timeya, so then she can grind together with the Eishes Am Haaretz. Because as long as she's Timeya, as long as the Eishes Chaver is Timeya, she's impure, so then she's makbeh. She's in a headspace where she's just like very careful not to be touching food. Because if she's tamei, she'll make the food tamei. So she's already, so long as she's tamei, she's kind of in a headspace, she's in a state of mind where she's careful not to be touching food, and therefore we won't assume that she will be taking any food with her hands and eating it or anything like that, and therefore she can be involved in the grinding of the wheat. She won't be touching the wheat, she'll be grinding, involved in whatever it takes to be functioning the mill or whatever. And because she's tamei, there's no concern that she's going to be touching and eating the food, the grain. But if she's tahora, so then she cannot be grinding the wheat, because then since she's tahora, she's in a state of mind where she's able to just take something and eat it. And we're concerned that maybe she will eat this. We are concerned that maybe she will eat this grain which is untied. Reb Shimon ben Elazar, Omer says, Reb Shimon ben Elazar, says Reb Shimon ben Elazar, even if she's Tmeya, she should not be involved in the grinding. Because we're concerned that her friend, the Eishes Amaretz, might take some of the grain and give it to her to eat, and then she'll end up eating this demai, even, right, because she won't take it, even if she's tamei, she won't take it herself. But if she's given it to her, if the friend gives it to her, then she might just not realize, right? She might just, right? People are in the habit of somebody gives it to you, you're more likely to just say thank you and eat it, and she might end up eating this untied food. So hashta migzal gazla chalufe mibaya. So now the Gemara proves from there that if this Eishes Amaretz, right, the question is, right, can we really assume, right, we had said originally on Vav Amud Aleph, we said that if a person gives ingredients to his neighbor, we can assume that as long as he's giving all of the ingredients, he'll get back all of the ingredients, she's not adding anything on her own. But what we see in this brisa that we just quoted, that the Eishes Amaretz might steal from her husband this grain that she's grinding and feed it to her friend. The fact that she's willing to steal, right? If she's even willing to go so far as to steal from her husband to give it to her friend, certainly she'll swap out and provide from her own stuff in the stuff that she receives. Right? Hashta migzol gazil chalufi mibaya. If a person is willing to even, right, provide their friends something stolen, certainly they'll provide. There's a concern that they'll provide from their own stuff. So we should have to be concerned that when you provide all the ingredients, maybe the neighbor who's cooking it for you might add some of their own stuff. Rav Yosef Asamnami Moriv Amra Torah midishe ka'achil. Says Rav Yosef, no. Even the case with grinding the wheat is also unique because, after all, the Eishes Amaretz, she says, look, after all, if a grain, if an ox was, working the field, right? The pasuk says, lo sachsom shor bedisho. You can't muzzle a ox when it's threshing. You have to allow the ox to eat while it's threshing. So if the ox would be allowed to eat while it's threshing, certainly I should be able to give to my friend here who's helping me grind the grain, I should be allowed to give her some of the grain. And therefore, because there's a reason why the Eishes HaMa'aretz would justify and rationalize giving the Eishes Chaver some of this grain. That's why we're concerned that she might give some of the grain. But when somebody's giving, some dough with leavening and everything to the neighbor and says, hey, can you make bread for me? There would be no reason to assume that she's putting any of her own stuff into it. Wow. Friends, we're going to hold it here for Daf Vav of Masechta Chullin. So Daf Vav of Masechta Chullin was talking a lot of very interesting things on Daf Vav of Masechta Chullin. There was the concept of, right, we mentioned the donkey of Pinchas ben Yair. We're going to see that tale tomorrow. But we saw, right, that, initially, we saw that the Bezdin of Rabban Gamliel made Aser all shechitah of kutim. That they made Aser all of the shechitah of kutim, you can't eat it. And Reb Zera witnessed Reb Yochanan or was aware that Reb Yochanan and Reb Asi ate it, and the shechitah of kutim, and he was wondering, how could it be that they ate it if even the donkey of Pinchas ben Yair wouldn't be, right? We wouldn't create a situation where he eats untied food. How could it be that there was a situation where they unwittingly ate untied food, ate the shechitah from kusim that's not allowed? So it must be that they actually held that it was allowed. How come Rabban Gamliel and his Bezdin said that all of the shechitah of kutim is aser? Because some of them worship Avodah Zarah, some dove on Mount Gerizim, and therefore this is the shita it's like the shita of Reb Meir, that choshish and lemiyuta, and if some of them are over Avodah Zarah, we have to assume that all of their shechita and also all of their wine is aser as well. We saw a very famous Tosfos because in the Gemara there was Hahu Sava, there was a certain elder, and here's the famous Tosfos that says that when it says Hahu Sava, it may be a reference to Eliyahu Hanavi. It says it's not always, as Tosfos pointed out from the Gemara from Lag BaOmer, which was yesterday, that sometimes Hahu Sava is not necessarily Eliyahu Hanavi, but it could be Eliyahu Hanavi. Reb Ami and Reb Asi had declared that kusim are complete idolaters. The question, what does it mean, complete idolaters? We said that the nafkamina is that even when it comes to eruvei chatzeris, the kusim would be treated like non-Jews, and that you would have to rent their rishus in the chatzer from them in order to be able to make an eruv. We then, right, because we had talked about this concept of how could it be that a tzaddik could be allowed to eat something usher even unwittingly, so we then got into the sugya of mixtures of demai based on an anecdote, based on a story of when Reb Zera and Reb Ami stayed at a kretschmer together, and Reb Ami ate a ta'aroves, a mixture of demai, and Reb Zera was thinking, how could it be that Reb Ami would have, was it Reb Ami or Reb Asi? I think Reb Asi. That Reb Asi would have eaten a mixture of demai if it was in fact aser, and Reb Zera found that actually a mixture of demai is mutter, although with a few caveats. It's not allowed when the demai provides primary flavor. So like, for example, if the spices are demai or the leavening of a bread is demai, so then that will be a problem. But for example, if you have some kind of fish brine that has a little bit of oil, has a little bit of wine in the fish brine, but it's not a primary flavor, it just happens to be in the mixture and it's demai, that could be okay. And we learned also that we do not have to be concerned with switching, i.e., if somebody provides all of the ingredients to an Amma Aretz to bake or cook for them, you don't need to be concerned that the Am Haaretz is going to be adding any of their own ingredients, which would be a concern about demai. However, if there is a specific reason, then we do have to be concerned. For example, if it's your mother-in-law who's cooking it, and maybe she's gonna swap out because it didn't come out good, so she's gonna make a whole new one of her own and give that instead, right? Or if there was somebody who's cooking, for a guest, and she says, let me give him the warm one. I'll bake a new one so that he has warm bread, and I'll take the original one. If there's a reason to be concerned that maybe she swapped, so then we do have to be concerned about swapping. But by default, we don't need to be concerned about swapping, and in principle, mixtures that have demai in them are permitted as well. Friends, that was Daf Vav of Masechta Chulin. I hope you enjoyed. Have a great day. Cheers.